seeing it in statutes, like,
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think from the students that I worked with, they saw it as a form of empowerment because their voice was legally being acknowledged to an extent, and you know, there's always the difference between what's in the law and what's actually in practice in terms of how students are actually being represented. Are they being represented fairly, or are they visible? I'd say to a large extent that there is that visibility and there is that presence in Massachusetts. So I would say that having that law really does empower students.
As far as thinking about, you know, being an independent organization, something that you mentioned earlier, Rachel, was talking about what can you do without asking for permission, right? And that stuck out to me because I think that's a lot of what OSV and Pritchard and IOSLI are trying to do, is not waiting for someone to say, we're inviting you in, but stepping into those spaces and saying we have something to offer. And in our experience, it's worked fairly well. People have been somewhat, you know, willing to listen, and I think as you gain more traction and, you know, build deeper relationships as an organization with community partners, you have more stake in the game, more adult allies and supporters. So I think for us that was something that's important. It's empowering as students too to not wait to be asked to come into a space, but to demand presence in the space.
We don't have to deal with bureaucracy. So that's pretty great that we don't have to wait for a social media post to get approved for like 5 days and go through like a whole chain of emails just for this one post on Instagram or something like that. We can do whatever we want. It feels great. We don't have to worry about any of those other things where the state advisory council that I was talking about, they also have to create a report. They have responsibilities for what they need to provide to the state. Our only responsibility is for ourselves, and that's how it should be. And that's really what keeps us going, is that we feel like we're being led by ourselves. There's nobody watching over us and just peeking over our shoulder at the work we're doing. We don't have to feel like we're, what's the word? I can't even think of it.
Yeah. So it seems like we talked a little bit about this in the opening panel of the insider work versus outsider work, and it seems like this is an example at the state level of thinking about what questions and what issues can be resolved from being a part of a governance structure versus what can happen from being a group that's outside of the government structure but speaking to policy, and that there's opportunities for both of those pieces. Yeah, pass it on down. Tokenized.
So I have a really good example in Kentucky of how the insider versus outsider thing comes into play. So we have, like other states, we don't have students on school boards, but we have a state commissioners advisory council. So this has been historically, I hope there are no, this is all inside information. This doesn't go out of the room.
Even though we're recording this and it might go somewhere, just so you know.
But it's all right. So no surprise. It's been a rubber stamp. It hasn't done much. It's very competitive to get onto this commissioners advisory board from across the state. It has so much potential, but it hasn't done much. Well, we have 3 of the members of our team from across the state are on this superintendent's advisory council. That's how I know it's pretty token. But these 3, and this is from all different parts of the state, have done the most incredible, subversive, amazing student voicey things with this title, that they're on the Commissioner's Advisory Board, but totally on their own. So one just did a research study on sexual harassment in high schools. We were inspired very much by Oregon, and started a huge local and actually a national conversation too. It was covered in Teen Vogue. Then another
Covered in Teen Vogue.
That's big. That's got over 1 million.
we got over 1,000 survey responses and
Okay.
a compiler report.
And this is participatory action research. We did it, a whole database. We helped push out that platform.
Put your mic a little closer.
Oh, sorry. Excited. That one's off now. It's kind of, is it not working? The second student, Allison 2, who some of you guys know, she led a major qualitative research study on mental health in schools, or lack thereof, in Kentucky schools, and has been reporting on that data all over the state for the last year, and mobilized other students to do the research with her. The third student, who some of you guys know, Will Powers, has been serving, has been helping with some of the ambassador work with Student Voice nationally, mobilizing students around a whole bunch of student voice. Anyway, they're doing big, big things, but they have that time, they were not waiting for permission, right?
The thing is, I don't think that any of those students did that because of the Commissioners Council, right? So like, they happened to be on the Commissioners Council. The Commissioners Council wasn't doing anything for them. They were gonna do this work because they were involved in us and other awesome groups where they are given space to do real things. Or in Allison's example, she just started an organization to give her space and to give other students the space. They were able to have conversations, I think, with the commissioner where they pressed him and where they asked hard questions, but I don't think that space provided anything to them. I think they provided stuff for that space.
And just one last thing, it's related to what you were saying, Jaden, like, there is no hierarchy. Policy work and grassroots work, there's not a hierarchy. They're both critically important in this work, and that was a hard lesson we learned in Kentucky, because we had a lot of students who had been through these student youth and government training programs and were super gung-ho to change laws in the beginning, and we got super burned. You know, we said we went into it thinking Schoolhouse Rock, we came out learning House of Cards, and so that really was a lesson. I'm a former high school social studies teacher, and that was a huge lesson for me too. My innocence was taken. But what we did was we went deep into the grassroots after that. We started working with schools at a much more local level, and we've made some policy changes. We've changed laws, but it actually arose organically out of the grassroots work. The Powerball promise that Emmy described, the reason we were able to, push the ball into the net was, I'm going to use a lot of mixed metaphors, but it was low-hanging fruit, first of all. And so it was so this issue of diversion of state lottery funds into the wrong places, people have been working on this for years, but we realized the missing piece was student voice, students as messengers and advocates, in the same way that Parkland students are pushing the ball into the net, because it was the missing voice, the unexpected messengers, the right messengers, talking about some of the issues around gun control and holistic school safety. Now people are hearing this message because it's the lived experience plus the policy and the data, and it's unstoppable.
And just that there are like grassroots policy changes, so like changes in schools that aren't statewide are like another kind of policy, and that we've learned that as well.
That's a good question.
Yeah, go ahead. Jump in, Adam.
My name's Adam, longtime fan, first time caller. I have a question that's all wrapped up in three things. That's subversion, favorite word, spectacular thing, really dangerous. The second word is progressiveness, and we can determine the meaning of that later. But the third word is equity. And one of the things, I read this paper once by this wonderful professor, her name's Dana Mitchell. You guys should check her out sometime. The paper was about intermediary organizations, aforementioned. IOs, I love that. I'm going to use it from now on. You all are examples of IOs in the way that I read your work. And as youth-led organizations, you operate, and I keep saying ninjas, you operate under this cloak of like, hey, we're here, but we're not. We're doing stuff, but you can't see it until it's too late, and suddenly your head is rolling on the floor and spectacular things have happened. It's awesome stuff. And so I say that out of respect and awe. The challenge that I'm thinking about and the concern that I have is about that subversion and the lack of explicitness in your operations. And again, love and respect for everything that each of you has done. In the 1970s, there was a whole big old movement around, student involvement in school boards, and around student-led learning, and around all this stuff that we include in the student voice realm today. But it all died. It all went away. It dissipated, disappeared, got soaked in. To the worst effect, some organizations, California, became very conformist in how those intermediary organizations operated within the education system. They got, I would say, seduced almost by the structure, by the outcomes, by the formality, and they became part of the system they were trying to change. And I don't really want to name names, but California Association for Student Councils was a little bit radical back in the olden days. And suddenly they developed a policy change program for students to learn how to change ed policy. But then in the 70s and 80s, that program was co-opted and manipulated to reinforce adult agendas to change education. And CASC operates as an IO. That changed up again in the thousands, thank the goodness, and they're coming back around into some kind of a more progressive, more forward-thinking kind of perspective. But my question for you all, out of all of that, is, oh yeah, equity. Here, let me jump in there really quick. 20 years ago, so that was 40 years ago, 20 years ago, Dana, when your studies began, it looked to me like, when I started looking, it looked to me like a lot of the student voice conversation was happening in activist type settings. Non-formal nonprofits or community-based organizations without 501c3 status. Like they were just jumping in, they were getting in the school reform conversation. Nickleby was coming down the line, they were gonna fight it. It was all kinds of radical activism, but it was being led by black and brown people and by poor people. And it was so exciting and vibrant to watch and scary, because if you were a white school leader and you're watching these black and brown people gather outside the door, holy crap, what do we do? And a lot of them were young. They were calling on student activists to get powerful and empowered and do the stuff. Oh, by the way, they're still existent, they're just not here right now. So all of that is part of this one question. How the heck do you do it differently? How can we ensure that your progressiveness stays intact? That your subversion at least becomes open enough so that people know actually they're butt kickers, always, all the time, even if they're sliding into the system and working with the system every now and then. And that they're dedicated and committed to getting all people involved in the conversation, if not moving them to the front of the conversation in terms of black and brown and poor people alike. Because I don't want you to disappear in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I also don't think it's your responsibility to solve all those issues at once, but I want to see something that's bigger than us. And I mean that in a collective sense, right here in this room and everybody who's been here, and the years of the conference going all the way back to Cambridge. I don't want to see that go away. So like, how do we make it more substantive for the long range and meaningful for the everybody, rather than the good work in Kentucky, or the good work in Iowa, or the good work in Minnesota, or the good work in Pennsylvania, or the good work in wherever? How can it be about the whole big picture? Thank you.
Yeah, give us that answer.
Yeah, if you could solve that really quick, that'd be great.
I guess I can try to take a stab at that one. No, I mean, that's a fantastic question, though. I'm biased because the 3 states that I've lived in, Massachusetts, Vermont, Minnesota, have some of the most robust student organizations and youth adult partnerships. So I have very much a skewed kind of perspective on a student voice with that. I will say, contextualizing for Massachusetts, I think the reason why we've been able to be sustainable for almost 50 years now is the fact that we're not just at the state level. We have regional constituencies. So we have people to answer to. We have students to answer to. They inform us. They give us the issues from their regions. They give us the issues from their schools. And in terms of representativeness, I would say, when I was there, anywhere from like 40 to 50% were members of color, which if you look at other adult organizations, if you look at state legislatures, it is nowhere even near that. Doesn't mean it can't be improved on in the State Student Advisory Council either, I'm not saying that. But something I do think about with equity for the state level, the Massachusetts Advisory Council, is that it's hosted in the Department of Education. It's our own space that we occupy. However, it's in a building that historically, for people of color, for ELL students, has been a place that hasn't represented them, that hasn't incorporated them into the curriculum. So this is, I would imagine that this must also be a very oppressive place for some of the people, for some of the students that are occupying in there. So that's something I really have been focusing on lately, is what kind of space are we having as a student body? Like, is this a place that's accepting to us when we reach out to other stakeholders? So I think that's part of the equity conversation, is being able to have a space where students feel occupied and feel like that they can occupy, and also having adult stakeholders being able to meet them, since historically we have constantly needed to be the ones to reach out to advocate. So in my mind, it's showcasing that we can put the onus of responsibility on other stakeholders to see that we are competent, that we are capable. We've already proven this for decades now. So being able to highlight that, and that's what we're all doing here to a large extent, and being able to push that. It's easier said than done, but that's kind of like what I'm thinking about in regards to your question.
Thank you.
That was dense. I think if we could answer that question, none of us would be here right now. So, but it does go back. It makes me think a lot about previous ways that people have tried to blow up the system. You look at the people that have succeeded the most or been the closest to succeeding were groups like the Black Panther Party or the Chicano movement in East LA, or you see Tinker versus Des Moines Independent, where all of these groups are being defiant to the system, and they're inspiring people, and they're getting these grassroots, they're having this grassroots movement where they're so inspiring, and it's just taken everybody up in it because it's a big issue in their community. And I feel like right now, student voice isn't an issue. People aren't seeing it as that because there's so many other more pressing problems. You keep seeing on the news lately about this state repealed their Planned Parenthoods and repealed abortion and all these things. Gun control, there's so many topics, there's so many things that are grabbing our attention in so many different ways, and we just can't focus. But the groups that were succeeding were the communities that were focused on those one issues. And I really, really love talking about the East LA walkouts and the Chicano movement, because they did create change. They succeeded. And there were so many of them in the community that came together for it too. And it was like one of the biggest forms of student voice I'd ever, kind of seen. If you have not seen the old walkout, watch it, please. It is so, so good. Brought me to tears multiple times. But yeah, if we could answer that question, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be doing these things. I mean, we'd all probably be in one group together, just kind of fighting it out. Maybe that's what we should do. A little collaboration.
Just process-wise, because I know some of you are timekeepers, because we were a smaller group, we're going to shrink the roll-alike time later and build more time in for questions right now. So we're going to go about half an hour longer in the session because we're supposed to be done right now, and I feel like we're just getting started with questions from you all. Yes, absolutely, and I want to respond to Adam too, because what I'm thinking conceptually, what I'm hearing and learning from this morning alone is when we think about work that's on the inside versus the outside at a state level, it actually blows us up to another level. So, so we have here on this panel a spectrum of inside state institutions lobbying almost from the outside from a very strong long-term organization with a paid staff member, a grassroots level that's very much wanting to stay independent. So on that spectrum we have a lot of things. Yesterday's morning panel, which I'm frustrated about, just sharing that with you all because I don't feel like it really shared with you what the work was happening with Philly Student Union, with the different organizations that are here in Philly doing very much that activist work of questioning, pushing, challenging from a broad range of equity. And I don't think we really learned enough from that panel about what they do and how they do it, which is a whole nother perspective on what this looks like at a grassroots level. And that was the intention of that panel, is to show what do you do at a grassroots level? And then it was supposed to bookend with this panel of then what do you do up at the state level? And why are they both important? And it's great to hear from Rachel about how we work so hard on policy, which we tend to think is the part that's hard to do, and realize that we need to work harder on grassroots. And it also just raises a lot of questions for me too in terms of what does it take to sustain this work over time? Do you need a paid staff member to keep it going? Because the Jadens are going on to Harvard and Daniel's moving to Minnesota and Grace is, in New York now and Manuel looks like she's 35, but she's 15, so, Andrew's off, and Andrew started it all, and now he's in North Carolina and graduating college. So how do you create that sustainability of this work? Does it need to be a paid adult who's behind the scenes? Can it be a youth leadership? So there's questions of sustainability here, all those things. So I'm gonna hand it up to Rachel, and then I promise we're gonna ask more questions.
Yeah, Adam, you got all my synapses firing. I just want to take little pieces. There's so much to process. But one thing you were asking about, like subversion, how do we make it not subversive? Subversion is the fun of all of this. And come on, admit it, everybody. You know it's true. But in all seriousness, the element of subversion is what we're really talking about is innovation, right? And experimentation. And not becoming part of the establishment. So like that mentality is critical in this work, right? We're trying to normalize subversion in Kentucky in a way through this work. We just want it to be normal for students to be in spaces like this, right? And not wait for permission, as Grace is saying, and just enter the spaces, bring in the Trojan horse of all the student voice values and just show them what students can do. I also heard, the equity piece is something, I wrote that in my little bio, like that's what we're struggling with always. We're a self-selected group, and I've been really adamant